Hey all, Chris Bassett here, and I'll be showing you how to change an alternator on a 2007 Pontiac G5. Let's get into it. This should also work for a Colbalt, as they're basically interchangeable. If you're not sure whether it's the battery or the alternator, I'll put a couple of videos on screen that show how to remove the battery, how to test the battery, and how to test the alternator. Make sure you disconnect the battery or remove the battery before replacing the alternator. You don't want to get shocked. Okay, so we've got the hood open. We're going to need to take off the cover and the air filter. So you'll want to remove this plug here, loosen this clamp up here. You can then pull that off. The air filter has two clamps, one on the side and one on the back. That'll pull off. But first, you'll want to remove the dust cover from the engine block. So go ahead and loosen up your oil fill cap. Once you remove that, you can pull that whole cover off. The cover's off. Let's reinstall the oil cap so nothing falls down in there. And then once that's back in place, you can gain access to this rubber grommet. You can use a flathead screwdriver, just pry underneath it, it'll pop right off. You also need a standard screwdriver to loosen the clamp that's snugged onto the throttle. So come over here, you'll see this bolt sticking out with the flathead screwdriver. You can then loosen up that clamp, which secures the plastic cover to the throttle body. There's a small rubber hose that is connected by two clamps. I used a pair of pliers just to pinch the clamps open and then slide them out of the way. So you can pinch the clamp, slide it away from the connection point, and then that'll pull off there. When removing the plug for this sensor, be careful, it's plastic, you don't break it. But you can pry underneath it until it pops off. I just applied a little pressure right there, and then it came off. As for the air filter, once again, using a flathead screwdriver, just prying underneath the clamps, popping them open like so, and then prying it like so, and then the filter will pull up and swing to the right. It's hinged on the right side, so just open it kind of like a book. All right, with everything loose and ready to go, you can now remove the air filter assembly. Just take it off and then put it somewhere safe. I'm gonna throw it on the ground. But with that removed, there's now several exposed areas to the engine, so you may want to cover them up, or I'm going to stuff a paper towel in the throttle and then cover up the other holes. And there is your alternator. It's over here on the left, underneath the side. You can see it's covered up by the radiator hose, so that'll be difficult, but we'll get her out. So I brought over my shop light, got the paper towel covering up the throttle. Let's go over where the bolts are connecting the alternator to the frame. So you've got one here, one right there, and then the third one is on the bottom side of the alternator. Kind of hard to see. It's right down there in the middle. If I can put my finger on it, you can kind of see it. It's right there. Right there. These bolts are roughly, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches long. They're 1/2-inch bolts, and I got all three of them off with a 1/2-inch socket with a little bit of an extension, so it pops off pretty easy. If you are having trouble getting them loose, if they're rusted or anything, you can use some WD-40. There's also two electrical connections. There's a cover covering your wire right there, and then there is a plug right there. So we need to pull both those electrical connections off first before we remove the bolts. I also bought a ratcheting serpentine belt tool because you're going to need to loosen the serpentine belt to pull the alternator off. I got it for like 40 bucks on Amazon. I'll put a link down in the description, but it worked wonderfully. If you don't have the serpentine belt tool with the ratcheting part and you just have a straight one, you have to take the wheel off and go in through the side wheel well. I'll put a link to a video where I watched a guy do that. But this belt tool's well worth the $40. That way you don't have to take half the car apart to get to it. So you will need the 3/8 adapter. That's what size the hole is on the serpentine belt tensioner. And then you, with the ratcheting system, you can angle it so that you can do the work from the top of the vehicle. I also bought the new alternator at the same time. That way the shipping was free. I'll put that link in the description as well. Alternator works well. You can see the bolt holes here, how the configuration looks. You got two on the top, one on the bottom. There's your pulley. And then you got your two electrical connections right here. It comes with a new nut. So everything works well, fits well, worked out real well for me. I should say well some more, but there you go, there's the new alternator. So let's go ahead and connect the serpentine belt tool. Make sure you're using the 3/8 drive, and then you have the ratchet set the right way. It can go one way or the other. It can go to tighten or loosen, so make sure it's the right direction. And then you'll want to angle it, I don't know, at about a 45-degree angle. It's really hard to see, so here's a picture off the internet of what the tensioner looks like. You can see that diamond-shaped hole in the middle. That's where we're going to be putting that 3/8 drive. Make sure you're using plenty of light so you can see what you're working on. I know this is a bad angle, but you'll be able to see down in there that there's a pulley connected to a belt. That belt wraps around the alternator, so we're wanting to loosen up that belt. And the tensioner has that diamond-shaped hole, so once you see that, just go ahead and wiggle the tool in there and then press it to the right to get it to snug into the hole. Once it's fully, interlocked, then you can take the tool and drive it forward towards the car, and that'll release tension on the belt. One thing that I did that I would highly recommend is to secure the belt in place. Once you get it off the pulley, I used a zip tie to zip tie the belt to the side of the car. That way it didn't fall down and I had to put the entire belt back on. You can see if you press forward, there I'm kind of touching the belt with my hand. It's loose. If you manipulate the tool back and forth, you can push it further and further towards the car, releasing more tension off the belt. But there you can see I zip tied the belt out of the way. Just that way it doesn't fall back down inside the car and cause even more problems. This way, we don't have to actually remove the entire belt. You just hold it out of the way, and then you can remove the alternator. I'm going to try to zoom in on the tensioner and where the tensioner tool fits in place. But once the belt is off the pulley for the alternator, you can go ahead and take the tool out, and then that will free up some space to remove the alternator. Let's remove the plastic cap for the terminal on the alternator. Just squeeze the plastic tabs together and that plastic cap pulls right off, exposing the bolt underneath. You'll need to take that nut off to get access to the wire connection, and it was pretty rusty, so I'd use some penetrating lubricant or WD-40. Spray that on there, let it sit for a few minutes, and then that nut should come right off. That nut is also a 1/2 inch, so pretty simple with the tool variety we're using here. Next, remove the plug from the control circuit. That way both your electrical connections are off the alternator. Next, you can start removing the bolts. You got those 3 bolts. Remember, those are all 1/2 inch socket, so just work your way around. I did the bottom one first, and then the top last. With all 3 bolts removed, make sure you put them in a safe spot. This is what they look like. I just tossed them on the top of the engine, but those all come out, and then the alternator should just kind of sit down there. Next, we got to figure out how to get that sucker out of there. So what I ended up doing was I tried twisting it and then pulling it out. We're going to move the hose. So I don't recommend removing the hose, as coolant will go everywhere. We're going to zip tie it up out of the way. So make sure that the hose is as far out of the way as it can get. 2 of these zip ties, they're like, 11 inch, 50. I can put that in the description as well. Heavy duty zip ties. But then we're just going to double up on it, make it extra long, and then zip tie it around the hose and then to the frame of the car. Make sure that you don't zip tie it to plastic. You don't want to break anything. Make sure it's metal. So pull the radiator hose all the way to the left. Pull all the wires to the right. It'll make you a nice big opening. And now you can turn the alternator. I tried to pull it straight out. That didn't work. I had to completely rotate it around to the opposite side so the pulley was on the to the right, and then work it out gently. There's lots of plastic, lots of wires, so make sure you don't pull anything, but eventually wiggling it out, you will get that out of there. And then real quick, if you want to test your alternator to see if it's the actual alternator's the problem or you had like a break in a wire, I've got the multimeter, set it to DCV 20, turn it on, put your positive red tester to the alternator's post, and then ground the black just on the frame, and then spin the pulley. You should see numbers. See, it's generating numbers. Okay, so we know the new one's working. Now just do the same for the bad alternator. Take the negative black tester, put it on the, ground it to the frame of the alternator, and then touch the post with the red, and then spin the pulley, and nothing. So we know the alternator's bad. It's not a wiring issue. All right, so reinstalling the alternator is simple as just reversing everything we've just done. Just slap the new one in there, spin it sideways. Make sure you put all 3 bolts in place, plug all your plugs back in. So I will speed up the reinstallation with a little bit of voiceover and then stick around for the end. I'll do a testing. So I am happy. My thumb's very happy. There we go. Let's go. Put your 3 bolts back in. Start by hand tight, but then use a ratchet to snug them up. Don't overdo it. The alternator is aluminum. You don't want to bust anything. Next, put on the connection for the battery, and then plug in the voltage regulator. Make sure your electrical connections are good, and then cover up any exposed wires. I'm going to grab some tubing, and I'm going to fix that as well. You can go ahead and cut the zip tie off, let your radiator hose go back into position, and then we're going to put the belt on. If you do need to replace the belt or the belt fell off, the only way to access the belt is through the passenger side wheel. Got to pull off the wheel. There's a cover there. Pull that off, and then you can access that whole side of the engine. Go ahead and put your Serpentine belt tool in there on the tensioner, apply pressure, then you can cut your zip ties off and then slide the belt back over on top of the alternator. It worked best for me if I held it with my left hand and used my right hand to pull the belt over. But then you can see maybe a better shot of where the tool goes into the tensioner. And then I bought some wire insulating plastic just to wrap all the exposed wires. Don't need any more damage, don't need to be doing any more electrical work than I have to. It was like $6 for this. So then for the air filter, make sure you reconnect the hoses, make sure you reconnect the plug. Air filter, change that if necessary, has a couple clips on there. Don't forget to remove anything that you were using to protect the engine. Push the cover over top of the throttle body and then you can snug down that clamp. Clip the air filter cover in place, make sure the plug is plugged back in and then tighten up that clamp around the hose. Make sure you push hard on everything, make sure everything's nice and snug, and should be ready to go. Place the dust cover back on top, and then you're ready to test out the engine. So you'll need to reconnect the battery or reinstall the battery. In my case, I removed the battery to test it, so we'll reinstall the battery, and then connect your multimeter. Turn your multimeter on to DCV20, connect your black probe to the negative part of the battery, and your red probe to the positive part of the battery. Fully charged battery in good shape should read about 12. Start the car, you'll see the battery drop to about 10, and then back up to 14. If it's up around 14, that means the alternator is charging the battery. Check out the video description for all the tools and parts I was using. If this video was helpful, a thumbs up is always appreciated. Any other questions or comments, put those below. Thanks.